Our next step that we're going to work on is how to assemble our booty uppers. So if you've watched how to assemble the slipper uppers, we're going to be doing a lot of the same steps. First thing I want to point out is that just like on the slippers, we have a notch that is indicated that is the inside of your foot. You want to be really careful about keeping that lined up in the right place. Again, if you feel like it's, if you're going to get it lost, you can go ahead and pin it or mark it with a stitch so that you always know where that is. I'm going to take my batting and then I'm going to lay my fabric on top. You'll notice I'm being careful to be aware of my notch on my side. This is kind of like having a flannel board, it all sticks together. So just take your time to get that all positioned. All right, so there's one, and I'm just going to do the same thing with this other slipper or booty upper. Again, I've rarely ever, if ever, made a pair where everything lined up perfectly. So don't worry if you're finding that you've got a little bit of extra hanging off right here like I do on this one. It's not a big deal. All right. Our next step is to put these, fold these together, put our heels together, right sides together. We're going to pin those. And then we're going to sew that seam using a 1/4 inch seam. And if you're just starting now and haven't watched the slipper class, I just want to point out that when we start, I like to start with my needle on the fabric rather than starting off of my fabric and moving onto it. And I'm going to take a few stitches forward and then I'm going to go ahead and back stitch, but I'm going to stay on my fabric the whole time because if you slip off of that fabric, it's really easy. The feed dogs will pull it down and the needle will pull it down into the bobbin. Again, I'm going to just stop and give myself a little back stitch. And I'm going to do the same thing with this second one. Match up my heels. If when I match them up, like on this one, I have a little bit of batting that hangs over the edge, I'm just going to go ahead and trim that off so that everything lines up nicely. That's not going to affect our overall fit of our slipper. A couple of pins. Okay, so I went off the edge there. Oh, and it pulled it right back in nicely, but sometimes it'll just pull it right down in there into your bobbin case and you don't really want to deal with that. So be careful of that. So here I've got one, my right and my left foot. And now we're going to move on to the soft inside portion, whether you've chosen minky or flannel, fleece. We're gonna do the same thing, line up our heels. And sew them with a 1/4 inch seam. Try not to go off the back there like I just did. See, this is, it gets sucked down in there, so be really careful about that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the other one. Oh, I'm gonna needle down on this and just fix my little slip there. Minky is sometimes a little bit tricky to sew on. Likes to, kind of has a mind all of its own. Okay, so now that we're done with this, we're gonna take, we're gonna turn these right side out. And I like to lay everything out just like it's gonna be in the finished product. So I lay my slippers with a right and a left. I'm making sure that I have my notched side. You can see right here, this has a notch in it. That's gonna go to the inside because that is where it matches up with the sole. That's the inside of your foot. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with my soft inside portion. I'm gonna find, I've got my notch right here, so I know that that goes to this foot. And I'm gonna put these together just like they will be in the finished product. So I've got my soft Minky on the inside facing out. I've got my fabric on the outside facing out with my batting in the middle. I'm gonna fold my seam open, match them up at the heel, and I'm gonna pin all the way around, matching up my sides. I like to pin from one side and then from the other side so that I don't end up with a whole bunch shifted to one side. I like it all to lay nice and smoothly, so I work back and forth between my sides. And then always be super careful on this part because it's really easy to get this knot lined up and then miss it in your seam. I've made that mistake a few times. Take your time on this. You don't need to be in a hurry. There's no rush. All right, now that I've got it all pinned, I'm gonna go ahead and take it to my sewing machine and I'm gonna baste at about 1/8 of an inch. You got a lot going on in here, so just take your time to get around this curve. Sometimes when you're in the process of sewing this, you might notice that your Minky is sliding around a little bit. Don't worry too much about it. Do your best to be careful and then just don't stress about it. It's all gonna work out. Okay. All right, so now we've basted all the way around the top. We're gonna do the same thing with the bottom. I like to work from the inside when I do this, but pin on, so I'm working from the inside fabric-wise, but I'm gonna pin on the inside here. If that makes any sense. So I'm working from my Minky side, but I'm gonna pin on the fabric side. And I do that because I find that my fabrics line up a little bit better when I have it turned this way as opposed to turned like this. But I'm still gonna sew from my fabric side. Again, don't try to make everything match up. It's okay that they don't. In fact, I'll show you in just a second. I can tell from the feel that this one has quite a bit of difference, and that is okay. We're not gonna force that to line up. We're gonna just take this over and Give it a quick baste. Remember, these curves can be a little bit tricky, so it's okay to use a tool to help you get around those curves, make it nice and smooth. All right. So once we have this all basted, like this, we're just going to go and trim our edges down to match our fabric. Once you've finished that for this one side, you can go ahead and do the same thing on the other side so that we have two pieces. And then we're going to set these pieces aside and work on the booty cuff, and then we'll work on putting the two of them together. Just like that.